Hi guys, welcome back to this series, Beginner's Guide to Russian. This is part 2 covering the new letters of the Russian alphabet. So we have quite a few of these, something I think there's like 19, I'm not sure how many there are. Let's start with the vowels. So it's not too difficult to learn these, from my experience. It took me maybe something like, I think it took me about a week to get used to them, really. So let's first start with the new vowels. So there are quite a lot of vowels in Russian. Here are the other ones. I, ya, you, uy, or, I краткая. The last one doesn't really have normally the other ones have the name of them is actually their sound, but for some reason it's not. I don't know why. Anyway, so the first one, weirdly enough, looks like an E, well, it looks like a euro sign, I guess. It basically is just an E. It's always an E. The problem with the letter we had before that looks like an E is that sometimes a year, say for example it's at the start of a word, it will be year because it's at the start of the word. If you want to write an E at the start of the word, you use this letter. That's basically all it's used for, really. I'll give you some examples. For example, in French you have the word écran, I guess, for screen. In Russian it's ekran. And to make an e sound at the start of the word, you use this letter. So it's basically that's what it's used for. It's quite rare, actually. You really won't see it that much. It's just simply just to write an E at the start of a word. Next we have what looks like a backwards N. It's basically an E sound. That's all it is. It's just an E sound. If you look at, there's actually a word in Russian, just E, and that means and. So E, so you could say something like da и нет, like yes and no. So it just means and, but it's just an E sound. It's always an E, it never changes. Just remember it, like a double E in English, it's always E. So it's always like that. For example, the word we covered last time, taxi, C, E, so it's just an E at the end. So next letter we have is ya. Looks like a backwards R. This is actually a word as well on its own. It means I. So you say, for example, я англичанин. I'm an Englishman, I'm English. Just I. I. Or я знаю, I know. Just I. Ya means I. There is one thing about this letter that I will explain in another video that makes it a bit complicated sometimes, but most of the time it's just pronounced as ya, and that's all. So another weird looking letter, it's U. It's basically ya, u, U. It's basically always that. There's nothing really else to know. Yeah, not really else I can explain. It's just a U sound. Next one is a bit weird as well because it kind of looks like a B with an I next to it, but it's one letter. It's not two letters. This is probably one of the weirdest sounds, especially for like, I don't know, non-native speakers. It's kind of like, the sound is like when you're getting hit in the chest or something like this. You can be lazy if you want and just pronounce it like an E, but it's basically pronounced uy, like that. So for example, the word you, singular you, is ты, ты знаешь, ты. But you can be very lazy if you don't want to pronounce this sound and just say ты, T. It's like an E sound, ты. So it's supposed to be U, but you can say E if you want to be lazy. It's not too important. Most people don't really notice it when I do that, but it probably will sound weird to some people if you don't pronounce it. Again, at the start, you don't want to have perfect pronunciation. You just want to be able to understand and read what you're seeing. You don't need to be perfect at the start. I'm not perfect now. Okay, the next one is basically like an E with two dots above it. This is different to year, and it's actually a yo. Yo. There are actually other ways of making a yo sound, like your, because you have, so there is another letter which is a Y sound, and you can put O after it. I'll show you that afterwards, but basically it's yo. There is another problem with this letter, which I will explain in a future lesson. But now, just it's a your sound, okay? And lastly, we have I краткая, which I don't really know why it's called that. This is basically just a Y sound, and it's really only used for foreign words when there's a Y at the start or at the end of a word. Basically, for example, Ruski язык. You see the end, it's EE, EY. It's not really, you don't really need to write it, for example, because you can say по-русски without it, or Ruski with it, and it's the same pronunciation, so it's not really needed. Normally it just goes at the end of adjectives most of the time, but it's just a Y sound, and you can kind of ignore it, to be honest, most of the time. It's not that important to know. It's just a Y sound, and it's just at the end of words, which it doesn't really need to be in most situations. So what I was saying before with the your, say for example the word yogurt, that would be I краткое о, like your, not your with an E. So that's another way of writing it, but most of the time it's just at the end of a word. Okay, now we have quite a few consonants that are new. First I'll go through kind of the diphthongs in English. Diphthongs are like when you have two letters in a row that make a sound together, like sh, sh, ch, ch. Let's go through these first. So I'm not perfect at pronouncing these again, but these are basically ch, sh, j, and tse. And they're basically diphthongs. So the first, it looks like an upside down H, lowercase h. Basically a CH sound, ch, all it is, ch. Not really anything else to say about that, to be honest. It's just a ch sound. So the next two, kind of difficult, because basically the difference is something like, they're basically both a sh sound. The first one without the line at the bottom is a sh, and the one afterwards is a sh. It's kind of like stronger. I still can't tell the difference, honestly. After 5 or 6 years learning Russian, I still can't tell the difference. So my advice is ignore it. Ignore the difference. I still can't hear the difference. There are some words that, like, you need it. It's important in spelling only. I never really pronounce them differently. Never worry about it. I just say ignore it. Great advice, right? Next one's a bit weird. This is basically a je sound. If you've ever learned French, like je m'appelle, je, that sound, the J sound in French, je. It does exist in English, like for example we have équé jeune, with a T-I-O-N, équé jeune, not équation or information, it's équé je, jeune. We don't actually have a way of spelling it in English. Normally it's transcribed as ZH when we put it into, we try to transliterate Russian. So basically it's a je sound. For example, very common beginner word, пожалуйста, пожалуйста. So it's a je sound. And next is just a TS sound, like ts. We have this sound again, but it's kind of in, like for example, cats, cats, ts. There are some like cognates, I guess, you can have. For example, like sometimes this comes at the start of words and can be a bit weird, but basically it's ts sound. It's all you need to know, really. Alright, then we have the non-diphthongs, the non-combination sounds in English, I guess. There's quite a few of these as well. A lot of these, if you studied Greek or know anything about Greek, some of these letters you will know, because Russian was heavily influenced by the Greek alphabet, so if you know those, it will be a lot easier. So the first one, I believe, is actually a Greek letter. It's basically a G, G, always G, not J. In English, it can be like, for example, you have like generate, generate is a J sound, but in Russian it's always a G. It's always a G. There's no exceptions to that. Oh, there's actually one exception, but I'll explain that in another episode of this. There are a few problem letters that have multiple pronunciations, but I'll explain that later. So this is just a G sound. That's all you need to know. So the next one looks like a 3. It's a Z, which could be a bit confusing to see this as a Z. Z, it's always a Z sound. For example, the word green, ziloni, Z, ziloni, Z. It's just a Z sound. That's all you need to know, really. So next we have kind of a weird looking arch shape. This is a P. For example, if you want to say hi in Russian, you say Привет. Привет. It's a P. It's a P sound. And it doesn't change. It's always P. Thing that's weird is another letter I will cover in the next video. Looks like a P but isn't a P. So it just takes some time getting used to. Next, a very weird looking letter. This is a D. It kind of looks like a D in a way. but it's just like a weird shaped D, I guess. If you think of like a capital D backwards, it kind of looks the same, but it's kind of similar. Yeah, it's just a D sound. There's no other explanation really. Next we have, it looks very similar to the P, or P, I guess. This is L, just L. It's just an L sound, that's all. It's kind of, yeah, it doesn't really look like an L, to be honest. Maybe you can confuse P and L, they look a bit similar, but I never had that problem. And last one we have is B, or B, I guess. It's just a B sound. It looks kind of like, I guess it kind of looks like a 6 when it's a lowercase, but it looks kind of like a B missing a circle, like a curve, in the uppercase, but yeah, it's just a B. So when I was recording this, I skipped past this letter for some reason. The last one should be F, which comes from the Greek alphabet, and it's basically the same as in Greek, but yeah, it's F. So I'm not going to give you some example words in this one, because we'll probably need some extra letters, which I will cover in the next episode. So I'll give you more practice looking at different words in the next episode. But that's all for this one. I'll see you next time.